Hello and welcome to the Augustana Human Library. The title of today's Human Book is Healing from Childhood Sexual Abuse, and this is the Human Book's abstract. I am willing to share my story of childhood sexual abuse and healing. I am also willing to hear and honor your story or the story of someone you know. I can also talk about types of healing therapies, family dynamics, as well as suing my abuser for my therapy costs. I am willing to go where your interests take us.
I come from a large family, and I was sexually abused by my mother's brother from a young age of probably, it was pre-kindergarten anyway. So I'm going to say 4-ish to 17. Fortunately for me, he didn't live in the same city where we did. So he wasn't around all the time. So that helped me out a fair bit. But as being part of this big family, I have many nieces and nephews and great nieces and nephews. And when I decided at one point, and this was before we were part of the U of A, and I had to pay for my own therapy, I decided that I would sue my uncle to pay for therapy, to pay my therapy costs, but also because I wanted everybody in the family to know about this and to be able to protect their children, their grandchildren, whoever. And so that was a big part of getting this out in the open. And so over the years, I've done presentations in the community as well as in classes, as well as the Human Library, because I really think it's important that people talk about this and that it becomes just a normal topic that people talk about, that it's not something that is, in any way shameful or difficult. And I realize that some survivors may not want to do that, of course. But for me, it's always been important to put it out there, just to say that I've seen too many students, because of the various presentations I've done, I've seen too many students who with serious issues and eating disorders and needs for therapy and things like that, and I have been able to help them, point them in the direction of therapy, and that for that work, I'm very grateful as well that they're able to do that. So I'm the youngest of 10 children. There are 6 girls and 4 boys. And sorry, that was my phone. Just a second. Of the 6 girls, 1, 2, 3, 4 of the 6 were abused by my uncle, and I'm the youngest. And then a number of my cousins were also abused by him. So when I came forward and said I was going to sue my uncle, my mother went to all of my cousins and to my sisters, and to see who else had been abused. And the oldest cousin that my uncle had abused was 20 years older than me. So he did this for a long time. And his own, and I'm sure he did it in his work world as well, because he was a national boxing coach, and unfortunately coaching relationships tend to be again one of power. So, and I know that his son was they were both in the Olympics, and his son was then got his coaching credentials taken away because of sexual assault, sexual impropriety. So it has traveled through the generations.
Kim, is it too soon to ask if there were so many people in the family who were abused, or maybe by your uncle, maybe so many people, not necessarily in the family? Was there ever a thought to have the law have him arrested, or is that coming?
Well, no, any question is fair at any point. So I had considered that. One of my mother's other brothers was the head of the RCMP in Canada. And his own daughter had been abused by the brother. And yeah, so my mother begged me not to do get the law involved because of the prestige of the other brother that was an RCMP officer. Now, the sad thing is, or the prestige of the family. So unfortunately now with 23andMe and Ancestry, we've gotten a number of new cousins, like a large number of new cousins from these uncles. So I don't think that the prestige of the family was really so high. But anyway, that's why I didn't. And I also didn't believe, I honestly didn't believe that the legal system would necessarily treat me fairly. And so, and I was in Alberta at that time. And in those days, so that was early 90s, there was a statute of limitations on when you could report and when you could sue, because which was 3 years, but it was 3 years from the time you recognized the after effects. So was typically 3 years from when you started therapy, is when the lawsuit or the legal suit would have to take place. That has been changed, thank goodness. That's no longer the case. But that was a big part of the reason. So I was in Alberta. The abuse happened in Saskatchewan, and my uncle lived in Nova Scotia. So it would have been 3 different jurisdictions involved as well. And that didn't give me a lot of hope for a legal battle. Although one of my nephews was sexually abused, but he was sexually abused in a hockey situation, and he was young, and my sister did take that to the police, and his abuser did get convicted, which is extremely rare. But it does happen that the abusers are convicted. Never, though, in my opinion, do they get a proper penalty for whatever that might be. But so yeah, I did the lawsuit just to bring it out into the open, to make sure that everybody was able to protect the people they cared about. And also because I have never believed in, the family secrets. And I have always been one to speak the truth as much as I can. So in the course of my therapy, I did therapy. I started in Camrose with group therapy. And that was really the best thing for me, because I'm a fairly stubborn intellectual. And if I had gone to just for individual therapy, I would have, disregarded, I think, what a therapist would say. But if you're in a group therapy situation and you have the women around you talking about their experience, and I could say, oh, okay, so that person is not crazy. So maybe I'm not crazy either. But it really, for me, it was really the best way to start in group therapy, because I could then much easier see myself, I think, with different eyes, because I could, when the people in the group, the women in the group, for instance, would say things like, Kim, don't ever introduce me to your mother, because they were very angry at my mother about something that she had said. And for me, that was sort of like a revelation, because I didn't know that I could be angry at my mother, and B, to see other people being angry on my behalf was quite a shock as well. And then I did individual therapy, and I did group group therapy of different kinds, and I've done every kind of therapy. I think almost every kind of therapy that's out there, from head therapy to body therapy to soul work. There was a psychologist in BC who wrote a great article, and she said that you can do all the head therapy you want and all the body therapy, but if you don't look at the soul, you can never be truly healed.
With these therapies, I'm wondering, Kim, no, that's not the angle I wanted to go at. Throughout this journey then with the therapies and yourself, have you been able to tap into your authentic values?
Oh, yes.
Because the reason why I ask this is because, I mean, you've been through a lot of trauma, and I'm thinking after listening to you that, I mean, you've been through various trauma, not only this, but some other things I think you've mentioned, that how does one either stick to their values or even know what their values is if at such an early age you are undermined?
Yeah.
So has the therapy been able for you to get back to your authentic values?
Yes, I think that's a really good question, Chris, because I didn't know who I was. I didn't know. So when my therapist would say, for instance, Kim, what's your favorite color? I had no idea what my favorite color was. What's your favorite dessert? You know, I didn't know those things. I didn't have a sense of, you know, so she would give assignments like, for instance, some of the hardest assignments would be having to plan something nice for yourself and do it and then report on it, which sounds like a great idea. But that was one of the most difficult homework for many of us, because so when you're abused as a small child, you are completely powerless. And what often happens with abused children is that in order for them to have any sense of control whatsoever, you put the source of the evil, the source of the problem inside yourself, because the adults around you, you need them, right? When you're little, you need these adults because they have to feed you and house you and look after you and all those things, right? And so you can't believe, like a child cannot believe that their parents will not protect them and survive that thought over the long term. And so it's easier for the child and much, much more common for the child to then say, no, it's my fault. There's something in me that makes him do this. There's something in me that is so black, so horrible that that causes this behavior. And typically with sexual abuse as well, typically these men are, well, men and women, but typically they are people who are paragons or people, upright citizens in society, because if you think about it, if you think of them as horrible derelicts or whatever, you know, you wouldn't give them access to your children, right? So often they are people who volunteer with children, Boy Scout leaders, you know, any kind of, like my uncle, a sports coach. That's a very, very common way, because then they have access to children. And also typical among sexual abusers is that they will start at a, you know, just trying something, quickly, right? And then with each time they gain more courage and more power, really, because they say things like, well, don't tell anybody, right? That you can't tell anybody this, or I will hurt person X or person Y or whatever. So for me to get to the point of actually understanding my own values, I had to discover who I was. And that took a long time, actually. In the beginning, I was never allowed, well, I didn't feel emotions, actually. And I certainly didn't feel anger. And so in the beginning of my therapy, I could get angry at something, and it would usually take about a week for me to get angry about something. And then I could be angry. But I could be angry on behalf of other people immediately. So that's the interesting thing, right? I could get angry on behalf of the other women in the group, for instance, but for me to get angry on behalf of myself took a long time. But yeah, there's lots of homework assignments and things like that I did that, are really talking about, okay, what's most important to you? And you do a, I don't know what it's called, but you do sort of a reverse. So if you say, for instance, that you have eight values and you write those down and you say, okay, so of those 8, which are the most important? Well, that's really hard to decide. But what you do is then say, you take 2 of them, you take one, the first one, and then say, okay, of one and this one, which is the most important to me? And then just go through them all like that, so that you get a better sense of, oh, okay, no, this really is what's important to me. But it does take a long time. Absolutely. I spent years in therapy. Yeah, but it really was the best. And in those days at Augustana, we didn't have benefits that paid for therapy. So but it was the best money I ever invested in my life. Because when growing up, always, for instance, just as an example, if you want to know effects or, whatever you want to know, just go ahead and ask me. But for instance, I was suicidal on a daily basis. And I just thought that was normal. I thought that everybody felt that way. And then when my therapist told me that, no, Kim, that's not normal to be suicidal. I was shocked, and I started asking everybody, have you been suicidal? Have you been suicidal? It's just because I didn't believe her that it wasn't a normal thing, because for me, it was so completely normal. It was so completely normal that every day when I'm walking across the street to go home, then I say, okay, if I step in front of that car, how will that be? Or if I, I guess part of what maybe saved me to some extent is the fact that I am a very empathetic person, and I would often consider the driver and what would happen to the driver if I stepped out in front of the driver. So that kept me alive. For a long time, I said, well, I couldn't do that to my parents. I couldn't do that to my family. Then when I was married, I said I couldn't do that to my husband. But then there was a night when I actually did sit in the car in the garage with the car going. And I had at that point convinced myself that everybody was better off without me. But the reason I got out of the car was because I decided to live for myself. So all the rest of that time I had been saying, no, I can't commit suicide because of how it will hurt other people's. And then actually what got me out of the car is to say, no, I don't actually, I want to live for me, not for everybody else's sake. So that, so that's one of the effects, for instance, that takes a long, long time. And it didn't and it didn't just go away, of course. But after at some point, I can't remember, but anyway, I thought, oh, I think it's been about a month since I've thought of committing suicide. What's that like? Wow. So I noticed it that way. And how I would protect myself in different situations where I wouldn't have protected myself before. Other issues, there's all kinds of side effects, like after effects, like eating problems. Those are very common. Cutting is unfortunately very common. Sexual issues are very common. I had a hyper awareness, and that's also very common. And hyper awareness means that you are, and that's where the empathy comes from as well, right? You have to be aware of what everybody in the room is doing and what they need in order to make people happy, so that nothing bad will happen. That is always yeah. So one example, though, I was also hyper aware of, because my uncle had lost part of a finger or lost a whole finger, and now I can't remember, and that's a really good thing. I can't remember. But anyway, I knew all the males on campus at Augustana who had lost part of a finger. And I could give you that list without understanding why I knew that. But it just was something that, well, of course, my brain paid attention to, even if I wasn't paying attention to that particular thing. There's flashbacks, there's, yeah, almost everything you can imagine. But any questions?
Actually, I have a couple questions. So, sorry, first of all, when you started telling people in your family this, I assume you were in your at least 20s at this point, right? Did people believe you right off? Or did you get, yes, okay.
Yeah.
Because they had experienced it as well, I guess.
That to some extent, and my parents believed me right away as well, which is sort of a shock, like it's a bit of a shock to me, in that they didn't question me at all when I told them. They accepted that he had done this. My mother could not actually accept it. Like she, and I didn't have any repressed memories, but my mother was able to, and I saw it, like right in front of me. So my mother, when I told them, she went to all my cousins and my sisters, as I said, to find out about who had been abused. And a few years later, one of my nieces tried to commit suicide. She was 12 or 13, and she tried to commit suicide, and she had been abused. And my sister one of my sisters wanted her to come to visit them. And my mother sat in my living room and she said, was telling me this. And I said, no, over my dead body would I let my niece go to that sister, because she's never done her own healing. And my mother said she was abused too. So she had literally wiped it from her memory, which is astounding. I hadn't seen that, so close up and so direct before. But I've never had anybody not believe me. I've certainly had, my mother has minimized it. I told my sister, first of all, one of them, because as I read the sexual abuse books, she was on every page. And so I phoned her, and unfortunately her response was not overly helpful to me at all, in that she said, her response was, oh, he got you too, did he? Well, he abused me worse. And he just taught us what it was meant to be a woman. That's what she said. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and she wouldn't testify for me.
So that leads me to my second question, in that, were you successful with that lawsuit?
Yes. Yes, I was successful. I was too young in my therapy. Like, that's why they got rid of that law. right? Because I would have liked to have been stronger at the time, because I was still far too much under my mother's control. And interestingly, when I didn't ask for enough money either, like nobody advised me as to how much money I should ask for or anything like that. So all I did was I took a spreadsheet and I, totaled up the money that I had spent on therapy to that point, and essentially that's, and I didn't even go for, therapy in the future. So I only asked him for $20,000, which is very little. But I had no idea how to value pain and suffering. Had no idea whatsoever. But my mother organized, the day I got the money was actually quite horrible. The way it's supposed to work is that the lawyer should, my uncle should have given the money to the lawyer and the lawyer should have given it to me. But my mother, to my mother, family is holy. And so it doesn't matter what anybody in the family does, because their family, they're holy. You accept everything. And so she arranged it that my cousin would come out and give me the money. So he came out and she said that he was going to stay at my house. And I said, no, I didn't want him to stay at my house. And we argued about that. And I didn't win. But I said, well, I'll go stay in a hotel then. And, but then thankfully he didn't have to stay overnight. But he came into my house and my mom and dad were there and my ex-husband. And I didn't think to have, any of my friends there, which would have made much better sense actually than just having family people there. My cousin then held me hostage in that he said he would not give me the check unless I told him what his father had done to me.
Oh God.
And so I argued with him for about 5 hours actually. And I believe that if my dad had said, this is enough, like stop it, it's enough, that my cousin would have respected my dad. But my mom, they couldn't handle listening to the argument anymore. So they went downstairs and mother came up after, say, half an hour or something. And she said, well, can't you just make him happy? Right. And in the end, I did something that I regret forever. But I gave him a copy of what I had given the lawyer. But I really was held hostage to that moment. And what's interesting is that I never told my other family members about that until a couple of weeks ago, actually, because I'm involved in another lawsuit and the struggling with how do you value pain and suffering. And so I decided that I should tell my family about that day, which was a big decision. But it was good to do because my family have been very supportive in this second lawsuit that I'm in. So that's been good.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Chris.
You saw me unmute.
Yeah.
I'm curious, Kim, when I watch your face, it's pretty neutral when you're telling all this.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering, is Kim's face normally neutral? Or what are you feeling inside when you're telling this? Your face isn't giving anything away.
Also an interesting question. I think I've done this so much, and because I have done, the years of therapy have been such a long time ago, that it doesn't have power over me anymore. Like it used to have power over me, absolutely. Just as another example, for instance, I was on sabbatical in Germany and my mother gave my uncle my telephone number and he phoned me one day. So, why would that happen? But he was being inducted into the Canada or the Order of Canada. And so he wanted to know if if I was going to make a stink, essentially, about it. But in terms of, so I have many of these horrible things in my head. But the difference is they are no longer flashbacks. They're no longer scary. They're no longer, yeah, I think it is just that they have no longer have power over me in the same way that they used to. And so I can be quite neutral about this because I know it needs to be talked about. I know that my nieces and nephews were much safer because I did this. Now at that time as well, because as a child, you believe you're the one who's at fault, then you believe that it's your duty to protect everybody else, right? Which is again a false belief, but it's a common one as well. There was in the group therapy, there was a woman who could not wear open-toed shoes. She was in her 40s or 50s, and she couldn't wear open-toed shoes because her abuser had told her that the reason he abused her was because of her open-toed shoes. But she didn't know anymore why she couldn't wear open-toed shoes. So there's nothing like that has power over me anymore. I don't know anymore whose fingers are deformed in any way. I don't know those things. I'm not hyper vigilant as much. I'm certainly not suicidal anymore. So the interesting things about the second lawsuit now is that I am making connections to the first lawsuit, but that's just like peeling another layer of the onion. It's sort of, oh, that's really interesting, rather than that having power over my emotions or my or my expressions. So in terms of what am I feeling, my therapist would always make fun of me because I would always say, I think, because have an analytical brain, and she'd say, no, Kim, what do you feel? So yeah, no, I feel good. Like I don't have any bad feelings about this at all. Like to be able to now talk about people being suicidal or me being suicidal, and any of that, I can talk about all that.
It's not necessarily, sorry, Kim, it's not necessarily bad feelings you're feeling. It seems like neutral feelings.
Yeah. And from the very beginning, I mean, actually at the very, very beginning of doing presentations. So I started doing presentations before I told my family. And so if my family came, I had to, hide things because I hadn't told them. But at that point, I felt I would have a nightmare every night before I told my story, because I dreamt in the dream, that I was killing whoever I was telling, that I would be killing them in the night. So I dreamt of, those weren't good. Those were not good. But I have learned a tremendous amount from my dreams, and the amazing thing with a lot of the symptoms, actually, because I'm an analytical person as well, as soon as I understood the symptom, I didn't have to have it. Like as soon as I understood it, not in my head, but also in my heart. I used to say that the longest distance is from my head to my heart, because I can analyze it all up here without doing the feeling part. But once I got the understanding as to why I knew the fingers, for instance, and then I say, oh yeah, okay, so I don't need that anymore, because I can protect myself. I don't need to be hyper aware. I'm not afraid of anybody coming after me or anything like that. Any other questions?
Can I ask another question?
Absolutely.
I'm wondering, Kim, I mean, being a member of 10 siblings, 9 other siblings, and a very large extended family, I hear you say the word family a lot, and family is very important to you. And it was an uncle that abused you.
Yeah.
And in 99.9% of the times, uncle implies, or aunt or granny or grandfather implies, you know, a loving connection.
Yeah.
Here it doesn't.
Oh. No.
So yeah, so it occurred to me that I mean, is it quite damaging? I mean, I don't even want to say that word. Sorry. Delete.
No, go ahead. No, say damaging.
Is it difficult for you to call this person uncle instead of Peter Smith? Do you see what I'm saying? That,
yes.
I mean, because uncles or aunts or sisters or brothers, in my mind, deserve to have support from your family.
Mm-hmm.
And a family is there to give you support, supposedly. We
Yeah,
all don't live in this ideal world.
Yeah.
But I'm just wondering, calling him Uncle Pete, he doesn't deserve the title.
Right.
What do you think when I say that?
No, I agree completely. And my response to him, well, one example, for instance, my mom and dad had their 50th wedding anniversary. My mother was inviting, and this was after she knew about the abuse. Well, she was inviting my uncle to this party. And so I said, well, then, I'm not going to come. And my siblings, although they don't remember this now, a number of them said, Kim, how can you do that to your mother? Right? How could I hurt my mother by saying that that I wouldn't go, if he was going to be there? And in the end, my brothers-in-laws got together and they phoned him and said, you're not coming. And so he didn't come. But he came to my mom's funeral, for instance. And there again, it was my brothers-in-laws that, would stand between us or whatever. But by that point, I was more or less okay with it and could say, I didn't have to talk to him. I didn't have to interact with him. But yes, in my mind, he certainly lost the right to be called an uncle. But the interesting thing is because I grew up, so I grew up in a big crowd. I was the bottom of the big crowd. How I tried to make people like me was by being the perfect child. And school was a great help for me, as were costumes, actually, because I could pretend to be somebody else if I was dealing with costumes. That's where my love of costumes has come from. But I most often tried to be invisible because the sister directly above me, who also had been abused, she went the other direction. Like if you look at my sisters, one of them went extremely into religion. So God was responsible for everything good and the devil was responsible for everything bad. She didn't have to think about it anymore. And the sister right above me, she needed to be in the center of everything. Like she needed to be in the center. She would always, it was always all about her. And so I did the opposite of that, and I disappeared. And so I didn't have support from my family. No, I don't think I ever did. And so one of the great learnings of this second lawsuit is that I have learned that I can ask for help, and that my family will help me. And so that has been a good learning at this point again. I have a much closer relationship with my family now than I had for a very long time. But it's interesting in terms of one of my nephews, my mother could not exclude my uncle. And so one of my nephews decided that he wasn't going to talk to my mother because he was so angry at her for, still inviting him. And, she would choose, if people said that he couldn't go to their house, then she would choose to stay at home with him than to go to her grandchild's birthday or whatever. So he said he wasn't going to talk to her anymore because he was just so angry about all that. And I said, I'm grateful, I'm grateful that you are so angry on my behalf, but I said to him, your grandma's an old woman and she's going to die. And I don't want you to have not talking to her for years, So I was able to convince him to not talk to her. But I feel very fortunate in that I was able to do my therapy before my mom died, so that I could, I can say the things that she said to me that were very horrible over the years. And sometimes it's still can be a kick in the gut, but it is, it's interesting now that I can, you always believe that your mother is there on your behalf, and I didn't ever have that. In fact, when I was talking to my family about this the other day, because we have a family Zoom meeting, and I told them about the first lawsuit, everybody, that in a group of so many, now there are 7 of us left, that each one had their own relationship with her and have a completely different understanding of my mother than I do. And likely the reason that my mother could not see me was because she had been abused as a child, is what I expect. And so, like my one sister said, well, maybe the horrible things that she said to you were things that people had said to her. Right. And so she believed that to be the case. So that makes a lot more sense. But I don't think you ever lose that desire to be recognized by your mother. So that was and so when I hear people talk about, their mother being so fabulous and all the rest of it, I sort of say, I almost don't trust it and say, really? Are you sure? I think we have time for a couple more questions. Anybody have anything they wanted to know?
What's your hope? What's your possibilities?
Well, my hope that I have seen from the volunteer work that I've done as well is that, when I started my therapy, I was already a professor here at Augustana. I had already gotten married. And so lots of the big decisions in my life had been made by then. Whereas now, thankfully, in many cases, well, in many student cases, those students get into therapy while they're at Augustana. And that changes how they interact with their children. And I've seen that happen so fabulously, actually, that the relationship of the mother to the child has gotten so much better because the mother has gotten into therapy. And in fact, the Canadian government used to pay for that. It used to be called the Brighter Futures program, and the federal government would pay for therapy for a mother of a child under 6 if the mother had been abused as a child, which is a fabulous program, and they saw a lot of success with it. But it was a one of the Ralph Klein cuts. Ralph Klein. No, not Ralph Klein. Stephen Harper. Sorry, you have to go federal. But yes, so that I think that makes it a little different. I think so. So now, though, even though there aren't programs like that, people are taking mental health much more seriously, and they are taking cutting more seriously. When before my niece tried to commit suicide, she had been a cutter. Well, and after she tried to commit suicide, actually, she was a fairly significant cutter, and people saw that, but they didn't do anything about it. Like I didn't know about it, or I would have absolutely done something. But she was on like a hockey team, and so they saw her, undress in the hockey What's the room called?
Arena.
Yeah, in the arena, in the change room, in the arena. And so people would see. And so you think, well, why wouldn't you say something about that to somebody, and take that as a warning bell. But in my experience at Augustana, the women who are cutters tend to be highly intelligent and highly ambitious. And to see them get to the point where they're not cutting before anymore, or they're not actively in the midst of an eating disorder, that is a tremendous sign of hope. And even of my nieces and my great nieces and nephews now. So my one great nephew that I saw on the weekend, he is 9, and he was having trouble with a bully at school, and his dad told me, well, what they did about it was they got him a therapist right away. Well, that's happening at 9 rather than, much later, after more bad decisions have been made.
or not at all.
Or not at all. Yeah. So I think that's my hope, is that when I see students, former students, my nieces and nephews interact with their children and know that they are willing to say, maybe we should find somebody to talk to about this. Maybe we need to get you some help for X, Y, or Z. That is tremendously hopeful. One of the things I did in Camrose many years ago was that I got a grant from the Battle River Community Foundation to supply a book to all of the organizations, all the churches and all the organizations in Camrose that dealt with children. And that book is called The Very Touching Book. Unfortunately, it's out of print now, but it's a fabulous book. And that, just the fact that the kids can see a book, I do a whole nother presentation, and we're out of time, but I do a whole nother presentation on what the books for children about sexual abuse teach, and how some of them are really not ones you want to have near your children. And so when I do that in class, I ask the students to talk about why is this book perhaps not the best one? Let's look critically at what we're asking the children, because lots of the books are asking the children to say no. Well, what good does that do? Of a 5-year-old kid, if you think back to when you were 5, would saying no to an uncle have done you any good? Of course not. What it does is put more guilt on the child, because they didn't say no loud enough. They didn't say no enough times. They didn't, so it's important to look with a critical lens at resources for children, but there are some really good ones out there, and that gives me hope too.
It's bad enough we do that to women.
Yeah.
Did you say no?
Yeah.
Saying to a child.
Yeah. And yeah, so there's some books I certainly cringe at. And what's interesting, and if I have one more minute, what's interesting is the Me Too movement. Now, when the Me Too movement started, I said, great, women are talking about this. But the problem, or at least a major problem from my perspective, is that all of the posters and things like that we're seeing on campus, even on our Augustana campus, say, tell the person you believe them. No, that shouldn't be part of what you're doing. You know, like if someone discloses to you, you shouldn't be judging whether you believe them or not. You should, from my perspective, you should be saying, I'm listening, I'm hearing you, and I will get you some help. But it's not up to the listener's judgment, you know, to believe or to not believe, or that just causes more issues as well. So I really want those posters to change, to say I'm listening rather than I believe you, because the pendulum swings. And of course, the bad side of the Me Too movement is the fact that there's no justice for people who are accused. Then they're just automatically judged guilty. And that doesn't actually help the case of the abused children. Because if it's someone you know, you want that person to have a chance at justice as well, right? So if you want more young children to tell what's happening to them, then you have to not make it an immediate judgment and villainizing of the perpetrator, because the kid has some relationship to that person.
I mean, your story is so powerful, and I mean, I'm always very appreciative that you're willing to share. I mean, I have witnessed the many ways you have positively impacted students on the campus, who will come and see you hours, days, months after. And when I was doing the sexual harassment, human rights stuff, you know, it was clear that you were a trusted resource on the campus, even though it had nothing to do with being a German professor. Yes. But what a gift to the campus and to, you know, their safety and their growth. And yeah, just really appreciate everything about you, really.
Thank you. I appreciate that.